Welcome, and thank you for tuning in to ESG Talks, a KBRA podcast series focusing on environmental, social, and governance, ESG. This podcast series highlights various ESG hot topics and includes commentary from prominent voices within the ESG community. In this episode of ESG Talks, Daly, Senior Managing Director and Head of KBRA's Public Finance team, interviews Lia Cairone, the first Director of Sustainability and Resiliency at the New York City Mayor's Office of Management and Budget, and Louise Yeung, the first Chief Climate Officer to serve at the city's Office of the Comptroller. Karen, Lia, and Louise discuss the risks that climate change poses to New York City and how city agencies are working to mitigate the city's climate risk exposure while investing in sustainability, resiliency, and adaptation measures.
Lia and Louise, welcome to ESG Talks with a focus on New York City. We're delighted to have you with us today. Lia, I'd like to start by asking, what are the greatest climate risks that New York City faces, and what is OMB's role in climate mitigation?
Sure, Karen. Well, first, I'd like to thank you for having us today. And it's really important to be asking these questions and having this conversation because, as is true in so many places around the world, New York City is already living the reality of climate change today. And we know that the climate hazards we face will get worse as time goes by. And so the three biggest climate risks that we face in New York City, both now and into the foreseeable future, are extreme heat, increased inland flooding, which is caused in part by intense bursts of rain like we experienced during Hurricane Ida, and coastal flooding that's made worse by sea level rise. So we're very fortunate in New York to have a local body of scientific advisors, which is called the New York City Panel on Climate Change, or NPCC, that provides us with regularly updated, localized projections about what climate risks the city can expect to face over time. So for example, we know that by 2050, average daily temperatures could increase by about 6 degrees Fahrenheit, and the average heat wave could last 13 days or longer. And by the way, heat can be less visible than extreme storms like Hurricane Sandy or Ida, but in fact, more people die from heat each year in the US than from any other weather-related cause. And heat risk is also very uneven across different communities. So New Yorkers who live in poverty, in Black and Brown communities, the elderly, very young children, these are all at heightened risk from extreme heat. We also know that average annual precipitation is expected to increase over time. And by 2050, the city could experience an additional 6 days of intense rainfall per year. And sea levels will also continue to rise, which will lead some coastal areas to experience flooding twice a day during high tides and others to be permanently inundated. So because we face these complex and worsening risks, and because there's such urgency to acting ambitiously on climate, last year, the director of the New York City Office of Management and Budget created a new team that I'm now leading, which is called the Environmental Sustainability and Resiliency Task Force. Our team is embedding climate expertise in-house at the New York City Budget Office so that we're equipped to adequately fund climate action in a smart way, whether it be protecting against flooding and extreme heat through, for example, investing in green infrastructure, or ensuring that we're investing in our buildings so that they're both resilient and decarbonized. We really want to continue to expand on the mayor's recent climate investments and commitments, like the multi-million-dollar remediation of Red Hook Park, the development of the Building Action New York City Accelerator tool, which is providing guidance for the city's buildings to decarbonize, and the New York City Streets Plan that invests in safe and sustainable transportation. Our team's role is really to ensure that we're taking climate considerations into account when we're deciding what priorities the city wants to fund, and ultimately to help make those smart decisions about the best way to leverage the city's limited resources to reach our climate goals and ensure that New York City is future-proofed and remains a model for the clean energy transition for cities around the world.
Thank you, Lia. Louise, I'm going to turn to you now. As the first Chief Climate Officer to serve at the Comptroller's office, can you walk us through the climate-related priorities of the New York City Comptroller?
Definitely. Thanks, Karen. And it's great to be here as well with Lia, who I have the pleasure of working with closely across city agencies. So as the first Chief Climate Officer to serve at the Comptroller's office, my mission, along with my colleagues, Jamie Statter and Steve Fox, is to deploy the accountability, oversight, and accounting tools of the Comptroller to get our city on track to reducing our emissions, protecting our neighborhoods, and transitioning our economy away from fossil fuels. Part of our role is as the Chief Accountability Office. And so part of what we do is make sure that the city budget and the priorities that we've set for ourselves are on track to reach our emissions goals and to make sure that our city is as resilient as possible.
Thank you, Louise. Lia, one of the city's priorities is the expansion of renewable energy. In March 2022, Mayor Adams announced the plan to transform the South Brooklyn Marine Terminal into a leading offshore wind hub. Can you talk about what this project means for New York City?
Well, this is a really exciting project for a number of reasons. First, it's an investment that is going to help the city reach its goal of having a 100% clean electric grid by 2040. Now, today, electricity that's used in New York City is generated predominantly by natural gas, which is a fossil fuel, along with some nuclear, hydropower, and wind and solar energy that comes from upstate. Now, achieving 100% clean electricity is foundational to decarbonizing our whole economy, and we need clean energy solutions that are both reliable and low cost. And offshore wind offers enormous opportunity to check those boxes and to create some other great economic benefits. So, as you said, the city is making a big investment to reactivate the South Brooklyn Marine Terminal and transform it into one of the largest offshore wind port facilities in the country. We're upgrading the port to serve as a hub that will support the installation, the operations, and the maintenance of offshore wind farms like the Empire Wind and Beacon Wind farms that are planned to be built off of Long Island. And as part of this effort, we are also going to deliver a community workforce development and training program to be able to hire from a diverse pool of local residents. And at least 30% of the project's contracts will be awarded to minority and women-owned businesses. This is the type of project that is truly a win-win-win for the city. It's going to help establish New York as a leader in offshore wind. And in doing that, we'll support the creation of 13,000 local jobs, help attract more than $1 billion in average annual investment citywide, and lead to the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions that are equivalent to removing 500,000 cars from the road.
Thank you, Lia. Louise, New York City has divested nearly $4 billion from fossil fuel assets and has been investing heavily in climate solutions. Tell us about these efforts and why these steps are important for the city.
Sure. Part of a transition to a green and low carbon economy has to involve keeping fossil fuels in the ground. Because climate change poses such a long-term threat to our city's investments in our pensions, that is part of how we think about managing long-term risk. The science that fossil fuel emissions are endangering our planet and the need to get to a 1.5 degree limit to global temperature rise means that we have taken a climate science-based approach to how we manage risk within our pension funds. Part of that strategy is our divestment from fossil fuels and proactive investment in climate solutions. So we've set a goal of $50 billion from our pension fund investments into climate solutions that includes things like renewable energy technologies, such as the offshore wind projects that Lia was talking about, as well as energy efficiency and resilient and adaptation technologies and other kinds of solutions that really help us meet our climate goals.
Thank you, Louise. Lia, the city is currently preparing an environmental justice for all report that will analyze environmental and climate issues and identify which communities are being disproportionately impacted by environmental burdens and which may not be seeing the benefits of green investments made by the city. Can you talk about why environmental justice is critical in environmental planning and what results you expect to see discussed in the upcoming report?
Yes, thank you, Karen. Environmental justice is about the fair treatment and meaningful involvement of everyone, regardless of race, color, national origin, or income, with respect to the development, implementation, and enforcement of our laws and of our policies. It's also about fair treatment and inclusion when it comes to the distribution of environmental benefits, like you say. So New York City's environmental justice communities, which are located in areas where either more than a quarter of residents are living below the poverty line, or where more than half of residents identify as a minority population, these communities are more vulnerable and often at greater risk to both climate change and harmful environmental impacts, whether it be heat, flood, increased exposure to air and water pollution, or unequal access to critical health services. For example, as I touched on earlier, predominantly Black and brown neighborhoods in both Brooklyn and the Bronx have the highest heat vulnerability ratings in the city, which is the result of historical inequities and disinvestment as a result of structural racism. Now, the city's Environmental Justice for All report will provide the first comprehensive assessment of the current state of environmental justice in the city so that we can begin to redress these historical inequities. The report is going to identify and analyze environmental outcomes and climate vulnerabilities. It will assess the city's contribution to environmental justice, and it will review the city's practices around inclusivity and engagement in environmental decision-making. When the report is released next year, the city is also going to launch a public web-based portal along with a mapping tool to provide transparent information to the public and to be able to visualize environmental justice across the city. And we'll be following that with a comprehensive environmental justice plan to be able to set recommendations that really center environmental justice in decision-making processes. Now, this is really important to everything that we do. Without centering equity in our work, we will fail to meet the needs of the communities that we serve. And as a result, we will fail to achieve our climate and environmental goals. And none of that is an option. So I am personally very much looking forward to the EJ for All report and all of the opportunities for positive change that it will bring.
Thank you, Lia. Louise, as we discussed, the city continues to divest from fossil fuels and invest in climate solutions. How does the Comptroller's Office use data to drive climate action?
Back in April, we created a first of its kind climate dashboard to measure metrics across different kinds of climate indicators in New York City because we wanted a tool that could help illustrate the monumental action that we need to collectively address the climate crisis. Because climate change issues can feel sometimes a bit overwhelming in their scale and the timeline that we need to act, what's useful, I think, about this dashboard is that it helps break out climate action in terms of different strategies that the city is already undertaking to reduce emissions, to strengthen resiliency, to address climate change risks in our finance strategies in a way that makes it easily understandable and can help track our progress and where we need to improve the most. So we wanted to create very easy to understand graphs and maps and progress bars to show exactly where we are now and how much further we need to go and where we should focus on. What's been really great about this is that it's helped also to inform a lot of policy decisions. So for instance, thinking about the risks of stormwater and flash flooding across New York City neighborhoods has really helped us to inform some ideas around legislation to protect basement units in areas that are most susceptible to flooding, and really think about how these ways of measuring accountability can really be proactive tools in charting future climate actions from across different parts of the city and state. And, importantly, I think it's also a great communications tool, whether you are a climate practitioner like me, or you are an everyday New Yorker who just wants to understand what kinds of climate threats should I care about and how is that affecting my neighborhood. So we're really proud of that as a way to collect and compile all the really amazing sources of data that we have access to and present it in a way that's interactive and really easily understandable by New Yorkers.
Thank you, Louise. Lia, New York City is part of the C40 Cities Initiative, the network of mayors of nearly 100 world-leading cities collaborating to deliver the action needed to confront the climate crisis. In May, C40 Cities announced the development of consumption-based emissions inventories for New York City and London. What is the purpose of the project, and how will a consumption-based emissions inventory help New York City meet its emission reduction goals?
Great question. So the way that New York City and most cities around the world account for their greenhouse gas emissions today is extremely valuable, but it doesn't give us the whole picture of the emissions that we're responsible for. So currently, for the most part, our greenhouse gas inventory accounts for emissions that are associated with the energy that's used and the activities that occur within our own physical boundaries. So the vast majority of the city's emissions come from using natural gas and fuel oil to make heat and hot water in our buildings, electricity for lights and appliances, gasoline and diesel to power our vehicles, and some emissions from waste and wastewater. But on top of all that, the products and services that we all use in our homes and in our businesses have an emissions impact as well. So across their supply chains, right, energy and resources are consumed until a product arrives on the store shelf or the delivery vehicle's destination, whatever the case may be. So by developing a consumption-based emissions inventory, we are trying to understand the emissions impact of the products and services consumed in New York City across their life cycles, no matter the geographic boundary. We're not going to give up the way we currently account for emissions. We're going to continue to track and monitor our progress as we have been. That's really important. But this new effort is really complementary. And with it, we're going to expand our knowledge about all of the ways New Yorkers influence emissions through our collective activities, including the food we eat, the clothing we buy, the energy we use, and the pastimes we pursue, like travel. And so Louise talked about this. Scientists tell us it is essential that we do everything in our power to keep global temperature rise within that 1.5 degrees Celsius target. And time is quickly running out. So in order to meet that target, we need to reduce the emissions impact of everything we do, including by making urban consumption more sustainable. So once we have this data on our consumption trends, we will have the insights that we need to develop actions that incentivize more sustainable consumption and build more circular economies in collaboration with our city agencies, residents, and businesses like supermarket chains and retailers. And on top of all that, it's an opportunity to work with the City of London and with C40 to pioneer new ways for other cities to understand and address their consumption patterns as well.
Thank you, Lia. Our last question goes to Louise. Louise, we touched on data and disclosure, and I understand New York City Comptroller Lander has been a vocal supporter of the SEC's proposal to mandate corporate climate-related disclosure. Can you talk about that and other initiatives the Comptroller plans to push as the asset manager of the city's pension systems?
Our office manages the fourth largest public pension fund in the country, and we are responsible from a fiduciary perspective to 700,000 city employees and retirees to receive their pensions. So in order to be good, responsible investors, we really need to know the potential risks that our investments incur. Our office is really strongly in support of that proposed SEC rule that you mentioned to require publicly traded companies to disclose their climate risks. So, for instance, Pacific Gas and Electric, PG&E in California in 2018 estimated that the rise in wildfires driven by climate change could cost the company $2.5 billion of payouts. That estimate was just wrong. That year, PG&E filed for bankruptcy and faced an estimated $30 billion in liability for their contributions to some of the wildfires. So, it's helpful to have an accurate target of risk and an accurate way to disclose that risk to a company itself, as well as to the investors who are investing in any company. That's why we've used our role as pension fiduciary to push for better climate disclosure. And in addition to climate issues, we've also tried to push for better labor standards, unionization, and even gun sales categorizations so that we can push the companies that we invest in to take better action on ESG issues. The proposed SEC rule is the responsible thing to do, both fiscally for investment managers and our office, as well as for the planet. Part of the climate strategy that our office is doing, in addition to pushing for better disclosure, is also preparing a net zero plan for our investments. We have a target of reaching net zero for our portfolio by 2050, and we will be releasing a plan that details exactly how to get there through things that we've talked about, like divestment and investment in climate solutions, and a robust corporate engagement program to push companies to take better climate action. So we're really excited for that. And, this takes collective action from the policy side, from the finance side, and from the budgetary side.
Well, I want to thank both of you for a fascinating discussion. I know our listeners will be eagerly anticipating this podcast, and just express my appreciation for your time and for your terrific remarks.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you to Karen, Lia, and Louise for a very interesting discussion. Please email esg@kbra.com with any questions or comments. We also encourage you to visit KBRA's ESG website at esg.kbra.com, where you can find ESG research related to the topics discussed in this episode, further details on KBRA's ESG approach, and other ESG-related media items. You can also join our mailing list to access our ESG Weekly Roundup newsletter. This concludes our episode. New episodes of ESG Talks air every other week. In the meantime, please visit kbra.com to access our other podcast series, as well as our ratings and research.